Basically, 3/4 of people in the United States have some information in the Epic electronic health record. So probably if you're listening, you or someone you know, some information in the Epic electronic health record.
From Research to Real Life, a podcast by the Clinical and Translational Science Collaborative of Northern Ohio.
Hello and welcome to From Research to Real Life. I'm your host, Craig Jarrett. I'm a clinical informatics fellow at MetroHealth. I work clinically in cardiothoracic surgery at university hospitals, and I'm a PhD candidate in clinical informatics at Case Western. Today we have a special guest with us, Dr. David Kaelber, Vice President of Health Informatics at MetroHealth, and the CTSC Informatics Module Lead. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Great to be here, Greg.
Dr. Kaelber, I met you when I was finishing my cardiothoracic surgery fellowship at university hospitals. I met you through two of your fellows who are now on staff here at MetroHealth. And I'd like to go back to what got me interested into clinical informatics and meeting you through your fellows. I was taking a class at Case Western Reserve University in clinical informatics because I was interested in pursuing this as a career. Your fellows had great things to say about the MetroHealth Fellowship, and here we are. On today's episode, we will explore the intersection of informatics and translational science. We'll discuss the systems we have access to provided by the CTSC, highlighting their significance, similarities, and differences, and we will talk about some use case scenarios where these systems have been used in research. Join us as we dive into how informatics enhances our understanding and application of translational science. Let's begin our conversation talking about Epic. Epic is an electronic health record software for large hospitals and health systems in the United States. Epic is implemented at 4 of our partner sites, CCF, MetroHealth, University Hospitals, and University of Toledo. The Epic system offers features for clinical research and recognition of medical conditions relevant to specific clinical trials. How does Epic support translational research efforts, and how does it integrate with other systems?
Right, so the Epic electronic health record, probably as many of the audience might or might not be aware, basically 3/4 of people in the United States have some information in the Epic electronic health record. So probably if you're listening, you or someone you know, some information in the Epic electronic health record. So then that sort of provides a huge foundation for all types of clinical and translational research. And so I'd sort of point to a couple of ways that can happen. First of all, within the Epic electronic health record, there's actually a whole research module, and that can do everything from help with recruitment to prospective trials to identifying certain research drugs that maybe need to be blinded in the electronic health record. There's literally dozens and dozens of features within the research module of the electronic health record, even including helping with billing, that really just facilitate clinical research. So that's one area to think about. A second area to think about is actually using the electronic health record as a tool to do research to change care. So I'll just give one example of this. So at MetroHealth, we've run a number of studies over time to really decrease smoking rates. And what we do is we're able to put certain prompts and certain workflows in our Epic electronic health record to, one, really help to identify people who are smokers, identify their readiness to change, and then help provide them with the appropriate tools, whether it be counseling, nicotine replacement, or other things, to enable them to stop smoking. So these are all externally funded research grants. And then the third way that I would point to how the Epic electronic health record is helping is through big data or huge data sets, either within an individual healthcare system, electronic health records, or now we're starting to get to systems, one I think we'll touch upon a little bit later as well, where we can combine de-identified and aggregated standardized electronic health record data now across millions and even hundreds of millions of patients. And that's a data set that's available that literally has not been available in the history of the world before to conduct certain types of research.
Great. You've talked about some use case scenarios where Epic has played a crucial role. Can you elaborate on a couple of additional studies that specifically you've used, for instance, Cosmos or even the institutional data set available from Epic?
Certainly. So I'll start with this is like an oldie but goodie. So when I started in this space about now 17, 18 years ago, I was actually medical director for my pediatric weight management program. And as part of this, I would see children that would be referred to me because of their weight problems. But then in trying to do a comprehensive review, I would also see that they had a blood pressure problem that had not been diagnosed before. So what would happen is every week in my clinic, I would see one patient like this, another, but it was all anecdotal. And so after a couple months of this, I said, wow, I wonder how much of an issue this undiagnosed pediatric hypertension could be just within the MetroHealth data. So at the time, we basically sort of had a data request button on our intranet. And so I requested data, which to me at the time seemed amazing, on like 15,000 patients. And again, as a provider, just seeing a couple patients a day, 15,000 seemed amazing. And so basically what I was able to do with those 15,000 patients or so is I looked at all the blood pressures that we recorded on those children, determined if they were high or not, and they had to have at least 3 that were high in order to meet the criteria for hypertension, and then to see how many of those children who met the criteria for pediatric hypertension based on data just sitting in front of us in the electronic health record had actually ever had their blood pressure problem diagnosed. And it was only about a quarter of the children. And so this is like 2007, 2008. This is actually recognized as one of the top 10 breakthroughs in all of stroke and cardiovascular medicine by the American Heart Association back 17, 18 years ago. So that's when I thought 15,000 patients was big data. So as you know, we've exposed you some to as a fellow, literally over more than a decade now, I've worked with, for example, the Epic Corporation to now create something called Cosmos, where now we have over 275 million patients worth of electronic health record data. And so we've really been able to do some very interesting things with that as well. So one example I'd point to recently, we were working with a medical school student at Case, and she had a very interesting question about gun violence. And one of the very interesting things about Cosmos is it still maintains all the data to be de-identified, but it maintains some geographic specificity. So what Sarah was able to do is she was able to look at different restrictiveness of state gun laws by state, and then correlate that with people presenting to the emergency department with gun-related injuries. And I think it's something that makes intuitive sense to many of us, but we never had the data before. It's basically a straight linear relationship. So, the less restrictive gun laws are in a state, then the more the incidence of people presenting to the emergency departments with gun-related injuries.
Very interesting work. And can you just highlight how getting data, institutional data, is now different with Cosmos, with the My Institution button?
Definitely, yeah. So now we have this all in one forum where it used to just be the press to get my data, and then the other challenge with that is I would get line level, comma separated variable data, and then I would have to crunch all the numbers myself, or I was working with a couple other medical students at the time. So, and even then, when I would say I want the data, it basically just took me to a form to request the data. So again, and I know you know some about this, but so from when I had the idea, first of all, I had to write the IRB because I was getting line level data. So certainly we're always trying to improve the IRBs, and the IRBs are working really hard, but that was a several month process. Then when I pressed the button and filled out the form, that was a several month process to get the line level data. And then to analyze the data was another several month process. So we're literally taking, probably close to a year from when I had this idea until I actually had results. Well, just an example for Sarah. So first of all, because it's all de-identified, there's no longer any IRB. So the IRB sort of, isn't a factor anymore. There's no concept of needing to request a data set, because you can literally, through the Cosmos user interface, you can literally just look at the variables that you want your analysis to be run on, and then you're getting results, very quickly. So I'll just give you some sense for her project. We went from project idea to submitted abstract. It was in about 4 weeks. So we took something that was many, many months and now taking it down to weeks.
That's wonderful. I wanted to hear another example of research where you've used Cosmos. It's just such a powerful tool.
Certainly, yeah. So we've done a lot now. We initially published the first study just talking about the cases that the types of research you could do using Cosmos. And then pretty quickly after that, about 2 years ago, if people remember back through COVID, this is right around the time when Paxlovid came out. And Paxlovid, for anybody that might not know, sort of one of the first medicines that could actually treat COVID if you sort of caught the person early enough when you knew they were COVID positive, and maybe if they had some risk factors that meant they might get sicker from COVID. Paxlovid had only been out on the market for a couple of months, and we wanted to see if there were any disparities in its prescription. This is particularly of interest to us, as within our CTA, one of the things we're really trying to look at is our disparities focus, and can we use our sort of research acumen to identify disparities and then try to correct them. So this seemed like a nice target to go after, just to see if this tool that was new to us at that time would help illuminate anything on a new type of treatment that was available in the marketplace. And so the nice thing is, if you're starting out with hundreds and hundreds of millions of people, even then if you only have millions and millions that are COVID positive, and then if you have thousands or tens of thousands of prescriptions, you can pretty quickly understand how new treatments are being used in the marketplace. And so we were able to do this relatively quickly. Again, it really took on the order of weeks. Unfortunately, what we saw is if you were white, you were more likely to get a Paxlovid prescription than if you were black. And we tried to risk stratify to make sure we were matching patients appropriately. So I think it was a really nice example, sort of an unfortunate example based on the results, but a nice example showing how we could really quickly identify disparities in new treatments that were available in the marketplace, in this case, a new medication to treat COVID.
Great. Thank you for that additional story. The CTSC offers a range of resources for collaborators, including mentoring for medical students, connections with PIs at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine, and access and training on Lyceum. Lyceum is a product created by Epic that introduces medical and nursing students to electronic health records early in their education. Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine was the first to implement Lyceum, provided by the CTSC, in July of 2023. Dr. Kaelber, could you share more about Lyceum and your experiences with it?
Sure. Well, just to put it into perspective, right, we realize that people come with very different understandings of informatics, and then they want to do very different things with informatics. So, one of the analogies I use is, maybe it relates to someone as a cardiothoracic surgeon, is, I think everybody needs to know, as a medical student, everybody needs to know something about the heart. Some people become cardiothoracic surgeons. Some people, they'll put their stethoscope away after medical school and not use it much, not much more. And so Lyceum is part of this continuum. So, previously what was happening, not only at Case Western, but at a number of other medical schools around the country, is that there was almost zero training about the electronic health record or training about any sort of informatics competency. Even if you didn't use the word informatics, all of that was absent from the first 2 years of graduate medical education, or the first 2 years of medical school. And so what it meant was that when the students started to come into the third year, they really weren't prepared. None of the foundation had been laid for that competency. Again, if we maybe use the physical diagnosis analogy, it'd be sort of like we wouldn't teach any physical diagnosis in the first 2 years of medical school, and then we just expect that sort of day one, you could sort of learn physical diagnosis on the fly, or talk to one of your peers. And we just know that that is not equipping medical students the way we should be equipping them into the 21st century. So for several years, we worked with the Epic Corporation to say, what could the Epic Corporation do to help with this? And that was really the genesis of Lyceum, which really comes from the Greek about sort of a learning laboratory. And so the Epic Corporation created this Lyceum module, which not only gives a whole bunch of bite-sized videos, usually a couple minutes, to teach people about how to do things in the electronic health record, but it's also really a whole virtual hospital that many students can be looking at the same patient, at the same time without sort of stepping on each other. And it has numerous virtual patients in there that can case scenarios can be wrapped around. So it's really a much, much more robust learning environment for medical students to learn about the electronic health record. We have the second year class now is doing their second year. We've got the first year class doing their first year. And we hope in the coming years to really be able to evaluate how well Lyceum is helping, again, give medical students those basic electronic health record and informatics competencies, even if we're not calling them informatics, before they hit their clinical years.
Well, Lyceum sounds like a great tool I wish I would have had as a medical student. I was fortunate to be in the Learner College, so we got into the clinics early. But for freestanding medical schools without a university, that would be a great tool. Is there anything else the CTSC is doing for training of students or fellows or residents?
Absolutely. So we really see Lyceum as sort of a pipeline. Something like Lyceum, we expect hundreds and hundreds of people to benefit from, but it's sort of like, it covers a broad spectrum, but doesn't go too deep. So we have other programs that might cover a smaller spectrum, but go a little bit deeper. So let me explain some of those. So one I would point to is our Clinical Informatics Fellowship. So this is a 2-year, basically full-time fellowship, open really to physicians because it's American Board of Medical Specialties and ACGME accredited program. We're now basically in about our 10th year. We're one of the first group of healthcare systems in the country to start a clinical informatics fellowship program accredited by the ACGME. It started out really facilitated by the CTSC, and it was just at the MetroHealth system where we accepted 2 fellows a year into the 2-year fellowship. But the vision from the CTSC had always been, it can't just be at Metro. So, over literally the course of a decade, we've been expanding it. So after being it continues to be at Metro, but then we also added a site at university hospitals where you're based clinically. And then with this year's recruitment class, we've added 2 sites at the Cleveland Clinic as well. So if you do the quick math here, it means that we're offering now 5 spots per year. And this actually makes us the largest clinical informatics fellowship program in the country. The second largest only offers 3 fellowship spots per year. So we're hoping in the coming years, we'll have 5 first years, 5 second years, sort of spread across all 3 of our sites. Start to have some early discussions. I don't know if University of Toledo eventually will be part of that mix as well, but the structure we've developed, allows for that as well. So we hope in the coming years, we're just going to be, again, the largest site in the country in terms of pumping out future clinical informatics fellows. So that's along the sort of the physician training pipeline. And then within Case Western Reserve University, again, really going all the way back to being sponsored through the CTSC, we did not have any formal informatics curriculum, say a decade ago. So through Dr. Jonathan Haynes, Dr. Satya Saho, myself, Dr. Mendel Singer, we've really now created a robust curriculum at Case Western Reserve University. So people can either get a certificate program, which all of our fellows get a certificate in health informatics, or you can get a master's in biomedical and health informatics, or even a PhD in biomedical and health informatics, which I know you're pursuing as well. So it sort of gives us the full complement of a rigorous academic program where people just want a little sampling of informatics, maybe and electronic health records through something like Lyceum, all the way to spending many, many years to get a PhD in biomedical and health informatics.
Wonderful. As a current fellow and a PhD candidate, I am very fortunate to be here. I'm thankful to the CTSC for starting the spark that led to all of this. And it's set my trajectory, I think, as a career in clinical decision support, integrating that decision support natively into the electronic health record. So thank you. I'd like to talk now about TriNetX, another big data research tool that is provided by the CTSC. TriNetX has been recognized as one of the top 10 informatics systems for clinical research, and both Cosmos and TriNetX are tools that provide access to de-identified patient data for research purposes. Could you elaborate on some of the differences between TriNetX and Cosmos, and perhaps examples of when to use Cosmos versus TriNetX?
Certainly. So, fundamentally, they start sort of from the same place. They're both aggregated electronic health record platforms. They de-identify the data, they standardize it. So that's the same. Where they start to differ, I already mentioned Cosmos now is about 275 million people. What we have access to in TriNetX is probably closer to 110, 120 million patients, so maybe about half the size. That's one difference. Second difference is that TriNetX is not just Epic customers. So Cosmos is just Epic customers. So if you're not an Epic customer, you can't contribute to Cosmos, but you can to TriNetX. So that's a second difference. A third difference, which to me is very powerful right now for learners, is neither of them require IRB because it's really de-identified data. But TriNetX has a number of built-in analytic tools. So, you don't really need a friendly neighborhood statistician or data analyst sort of if you have the right question. You can get your, Kaplan-Meier curves, your Cox proportions, your hazard risk, odds ratios, relative risk, p-values, confidence intervals, all right out of the TriNetX tool. And you just can't do that, at least today, to the same degree in Cosmos. So that's another really big difference. In theory, TriNetX has more international data than Cosmos does. Although what I sort of tell people is I sort of have a good handle on how electronic health records are used in the US. It's very hard for me to know sort of how that underlying data is created in other countries. So I typically recommend staying away from some of the global data unless there's sort of a very particular need for that.
Hi everyone, I'm Mackenzie Ritter, the Assistant Director of Research, Education, and Training at the CTSC, and I'd just like to take a few moments to highlight some upcoming education and training programs as well as some opportunities in the realm of education. So the first is the Advanced Translational Leadership in Academic Science program, and actually the first cohort has completed the program as of a few months ago, and this cohort focused on mid-career and senior level investigators. We're currently finalizing the second cohort that will focus on early stage investigators. This program seemed to be very successful, so stay tuned for other news about the updates in regards to Atlas. Another program that I would like to highlight is Science Cafe, which is a monthly seminar series that aims to increase collaboration by bringing together investigators, trainees, and community members around a common research area. So if you're interested in seeing the full schedule, or if you have a topic that you would like to suggest for a future session, be sure to check out our website. And then the last event that I would like to highlight is that we have an upcoming CTSC Research Discovery Day that will take place on March 21st of 2025. This will be in person at Tinkomville, and this is a day that will showcase not only all of the research that's going on within the CTSC, but also our 6 partnering institutions. So another component of this day is that it will provide local high school students with the opportunity to learn about research as well as the vast number of careers in clinical research. So if you're interested in either submitting an abstract or volunteering and being involved in the day, be sure to go to the CTSC website and click on the Research Discovery Day tab.
Can you provide some examples of how TriNetX has been applied to a translational research project?
Certainly. So one of the ones that made a lot of popular press and as well as already well cited from earlier this year, these new medicines on the market called like semaglutide is one of them. It's a new type of medicine that a lot of people they still use a lot for type 2 diabetes, and a lot of people are using it for weight loss now as well. It's an injectable medicine. Millions and millions of people are being prescribed it. And then starting about a year ago now, in the summer of 2023, there started to be concerns of, wow, it seems like some of the people on this medicine are having suicidal ideations or sort of thoughts of suicide. Obviously, very concerning. FDA and others started to just sort of recognize this. But the important thing here, if you're giving something to millions and millions of people, some of them will have suicidal ideations, some of them will have heart attacks, some of them will have colds. It doesn't mean that medicine they're on is necessarily causing them. Although, of course, in the history of the US, we have examples where sometimes medicines do create side effects that weren't understood prior to them going on the market because you're just not able to test in a large enough population for a long enough period of time. But now we have TriNetX. And so we're able to basically conduct a study in sort of November and December of 2023, looking at the association where we had millions and millions of people on these semaglutide medication and what was their risk or odds of having a suicidal thought, and then really match those to people that weren't on those medicines and what was their chance of having suicidal thoughts. And basically what we showed was that, yes, there are people on the medicines that have suicidal thoughts. So those case reports were true. But when you look at the full range of how they're used in the denominator, actually those people that population did not have a disproportionate number of suicides or suicidal thoughts. And so what happened then is, we published this, and literally within about a week, the U.S. FDA came out with basically a statement saying, hey, don't worry about suicidal thoughts in the semaglutide medication. The European equivalent to the FDA a couple months later came out basically with the same statement there. So we didn't talk to the regulators, but in Europe, they actually cited our study as one of the reasons for them to make their decision. So to me, that was very exciting because not only was it good science, but it really helped to shape public policy, at least in the form of drug regulation in this space. So we continue to have this very valuable medicine available to lots and lots of people with assurance that it doesn't seem to cause an increase in suicidal thoughts.
That's a wonderful study. And I'd just like to reiterate that in this is a good example of a negative study being published. And so your null hypothesis was that there was no difference in suicidal ideations when patients taking these medications and patients not taking these medications. You found that there was no difference. And so it could be thought of as a negative result, which is highly publishable.
Right. Yeah, and usually negative results are really hard to publish, but this is one of those cases where, again, if there's the right alignment with really a public policy question, then people are really almost more, they would have been interested in the positive result too, but they're very interested in the negative result.
Wonderful. So I use TriNetX for our PhD qualifying exam, as you know. The question was to specifically use TriNetX to answer a research question in your field of study. And so one of the things I thought was interesting, and we have worked on before in other databases, was the increased rate of permanent pacemaker insertion with transcatheter aortic valve replacement. So in transcatheter aortic valve replacement, we have a valve that pushes out the aortic valve leaflets and puts pressure on the conduction system of the heart. So there is an underlying mechanism for increased permanent pacemaker insertion. And so I wanted to study this using TriNetX. And so for the qualifying exam, I found that TriNetX was very easy to use. We had only a couple weeks, to answer these questions for the PhD qualifying exam. And I was able to show that indeed there was an increased rate of permanent pacemaker insertion with TAVR, which is kind of well known. It hasn't been shown yet with the TriNetX data, and with multiple valves. So if you add on mitral valve with additional valves, you increase the permanent pacemaker insertion rate. So it's a very easy tool to use. The graphic user interface allows you to get all of the statistical analyses that Dr. Kaelber already mentioned.
Yeah, just to build on that a little bit, I'll just tell you, earlier this week, we just signed up our 500th person as a TriNetX user, and most of those users are learners, so medical students, residents, fellows. And my typical spiel is I can take someone that's never used TriNetX before, sort of give a half-hour orientation to them when they set up their account, make sure they have account access by the end of the half an hour, tell them to basically do 3 to 4 hours of online self-study videos that are embedded in TriNetX, and then they can use the tool. They have enough sophistication, enough skills then to use the tool after those 3 to 4 hours of self-study. There's a little bit of a thought and experience that goes into picking the right question. You have a lot of those skills now. I try to help students, but it's a very quick turnaround. I'll just give you a sense of, last I did one orientation, these 30 minutes, a week ago Friday, so about 10 days ago. Already earlier this week, there was a medical student who's already like, hey, I think I found some. I want to write up. Can you look at it really quick? I have an abstract I want to submit it to by the end of the week. Now, I'm not necessarily that's typical, but it's just this idea you can take someone from sort of like 0 to 60 or 0 to, an abstract, particularly if they're very engaged, literally can even be in a matter of days.
As another example of a tool offered by the CTSC, I'd like our listeners to hear about REDCap. So personally, I love REDCap. I use it for every study I do with institutional data. It's easy to sign up. The best feature of REDCap is that you get out very clean data. It forces the investigator, the researcher, to enter data in a specific way, and then by default, you get out clean data. Gone are the days of getting Excel spreadsheets with random yeses and nos spelled 3 different ways if you use REDCap. So can you elaborate on your REDCap experience?
Sure. So REDCap, just so everybody understands, the way I sort of describe it, it's sort of like a HIPAA-compliant database program, but it's really a platform then too. So it really forces standardization, and usually that's good. All of the sites in the CTSC all use it. I would say for Metro, the one I'm most familiar with, we have literally thousands of users at this point and thousands of studies, over more than a decade. It not only allows research coordinators to put in data as really structured data. One of the other things that we have a lot of people using is the survey tool. So you can build a survey in REDCap, and then you can basically send that hyperlink to anybody that you want to participate in the study, and then they can actually be doing the data entry as well. So a lot of our residents, for example, one of the ways that they might do scholarly activity is to build a REDCap survey and then send that out to folks. So yes, I think it's another very powerful tool. I mean, it's different than some of the other tools like TriNetX and Cosmos, but another very powerful tool we have in sort of our informatics toolkit that we provide and support through the CTSC.
And if you received any correspondence from the CTSC, specifically for the webinars or the Datathon, those are examples of REDCap surveys. So that is a great feature as well. Thank you. If a CTSC investigator wants training or access to these systems, how would they gain access?
Right. So hopefully everybody on the podcast knows about the Spark system. So that's the formal request system throughout all of the CTSC sites. If somehow you're not familiar with it, the website is, I think it's spark.case.edu. You should also know, each of the institutions also has a CTSC representative, not only in informatics, but in other areas. So anybody at your institution that you think has any inkling of the CTSC should be able to direct you to the Spark system as well. But that's really the intake system, not only for learning about these tools, but for any other services and support from the CTSC. And then we route it appropriately based on the nature of the request, either to the right institution and then the right people within the CTSC in that institution.
Sounds easy enough. If a potential investigator does not know who to request the route to, how would you suggest proceeding in that scenario?
So, one of the things we talk a lot about in informatics is really like a research informatics consult. So, one of the things is, as we talk about in the fellowship too, you don't need to come to us with the solution of what you think you need. If you just come to us with the question, we have a lot of expertise to guide you for what the best approach forward would be. So one of the things you can request a specific service through the Spark request system, or you can basically say, I just need a research informatics consult. So that's basically just sort of raising your hand saying, I need some help, and then we'll come help you. And then we'll figure out, do you need access to TriNetX and help with that? What about Cosmos? Maybe it's using some of those, many research functions within the Epic module that we talked about. Maybe it's I want to use some of the new functionality around texting and personal health record messaging to help with recruitment. So any of those services we could help direct you to through Research Informatics Consult through Spark.
Great. Does the CTSC have any upcoming events for the informatics module that listeners should know about?
I'm so glad you asked, Greg. So for the first time ever, and we're one of very, very few CTSCs in the country, that we are hosting a Cosmos Datathon. That is going to be an all-day event on Saturday, December 7th from 8 a.m. till about 5 p.m. in the Wolstein building on the Case Western Reserve University campus. We're asking people to apply for that or register for that. We're going to have people working in teams, so even if you don't know much about Cosmos, that's okay. We're going to be pairing more experienced people with less experienced people on the teams. We hope to sort of have team themes. So depending on who all comes, we're hoping to group people by like areas of interest. And, the goal of that is, one, hopefully we can actually generate a little bit of science even by the end of the day, because 8 hours is a lot of time when you're using these tools. And even more than that, we hope to be able to generate partnerships in like areas that hopefully will continue to use Cosmos after the Datathon and might lead to other things, potentially grants, publications, even outside of Cosmos. And we are hoping that this will be the first annual Cosmos Datathon, but it all depends on people like the listeners signing up and then showing up and learning about Cosmos.
And this is the first multi-institutional Cosmos Datathon. There have been a couple of prior Datathons at single institutions, so we look forward to hosting that. Well, thank you, Dr. Kaelber, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. And for our listeners, don't forget to check out Spark for training on the systems we discussed today. You can find a link to the Spark website in the description. As always, we encourage you to become a member of the CTSC. There's no cost to join. This is the best way to stay informed about our events, funding opportunities, and research support. Please visit our website or follow the links in the podcast description. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on From Research to Real Life.
From Research to Real Life is brought to you by the Clinical and Translational Science Collaborative of Northern Ohio. The views, recommendations, and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the presenters and not necessarily those of the CTSC or its partners.